Hey, boy, oh boy, oh boy. Man, that's an earthquake. Hey, that's an earthquake for sure. Woo! It's going to get away. Doesn't come up very often up here, but I'm going through it right now. Oh, man, I'm telling you, I've never lived through anything like this before in my life. And it hasn't even shown signs of stopping yet either.
It is March 27th, 1964. It is the late afternoon, and many of the unsuspecting citizens of Alaska were just settling down to eat dinner. It was a normal Friday evening, until something shattered the night. Little did the unwary citizens know, powerful natural forces were at work. Far underneath the ground, the Pacific tectonic plate was trying to force itself under Alaska. The only thing stopping it was the fault, stuck against the opposing tectonic plate. About 25 kilometers below the surface, this area was being placed under an immense amount of pressure, and tension had been building over the past 500 years. This fault was on the verge of rupturing, moments away from releasing massive amounts of energy onto the state of Alaska, moments away from unleashing America's most powerful earthquake. The 1964 Great Alaska Earthquake would tragically devastate Alaska, leveling cities and killing citizens. But this event later would triumphantly protect Alaska and ultimately become a watershed moment in seismology, completely altering the way scientists viewed earthquakes.
Prior to the 1964 Alaskan earthquake, scientists had limited knowledge of what happens far beneath the earth. What little knowledge scientists had about earthquakes had been accumulated over many years of studying these disasters. Many immense earthquakes have been studied over the years. A deadly earthquake that occurred more than 100 years ago was the Sanriku earthquake. The 1896 Sanriku earthquake was a devastating event. The magnitude was 8.5, but the epicenter was 90 miles off the coast, so the people of Japan barely acknowledged it. There was little to no expectation of a tsunami to occur. 35 minutes after the earthquake, the most devastating tsunami in Japan's history reached the shore at the same time as high tide. Over 26,000 were killed in the tragic tsunami. Then, 10 years later, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, at a magnitude of 7.9, caused millions of dollars of destruction. While the initial quake did a lot of damage, fires caused by the quake caused the most destruction. They burned for several days after the earthquake had subsided. The death tally was more than 3,000 and over 28,000 buildings were destroyed. After these devastating quakes, Harry Reid theorized that earthquakes were the result of stresses built up along faults.
Then, in 1960, the biggest earthquake ever recorded, at a 9.5 on the Richter scale, devastated Chile. This quake killed 5,000 people and left another 2 million homeless. Scientists had learned several things over the years about earthquakes. However, nothing could have prepared the citizens of Alaska for Good Friday, March 27, 1964.
On March 27, 1964, at 5:36 p.m. local time, about 600 miles of fault ruptured at once, unleashing America's most powerful earthquake. Nobody had time to prepare. It was dinner time and you were watching Fireball XL5 1 minute, and the next it was the end of the world. The ground shook for approximately 4.5 minutes.
When I looked down 4th Avenue, it just looked like an ocean of the buildings and the pavement was just going up and down like big, huge waves up and down. The ground was.
The earthquake devastated buildings, residential and commercial alike. The new 5-story J.C. Penney building partially collapsed, killing a crouching pedestrian and a nearby passing driver. The shaking also took its toll on the Earth's crust. Geological surveys taken immediately afterward indicate parts of the Alaskan coast sank up to 8 feet, while other parts rose 38 feet. After the shaking stopped, almost nothing was the same. Many citizens were without electricity and/or water. 15 people were dead. All of Alaska was in shock. However, if any citizen thought their troubles were over after the initial tremors, they were completely wrong. The worst was yet to come.
Many big earthquakes that occurred before the 1964 earthquake had caused other events to occur, such as fires or tsunamis that generated as much or even more casualties and damage than the initial shaking. The Alaska earthquake was no exception. The second wave of this disaster struck before many citizens had time to react. 20 seconds after the earthquake was over, 98 million cubic yards of the delta in Valdez slumped into the water. This created a massive 60-foot-tall local tsunami that killed 30 people as they tried to run away from the towering wall of water. Similar events occurred all over Alaska as landslides and tsunamis devastated towns, villages, and communities. In Anchorage, there was a massive landslide. In addition to the JCPenney building, the Four Seasons apartment building and the control tower collapsed.
So in the town of Seward, the entire waterfront was destroyed and all the railroad tracks and all the fuel storage facilities. There was a huge fire and pretty much the whole waterfront was destroyed. In Valdez, the whole waterfront was destroyed and the whole town, they decided, was not habitable. The whole town was demolished and they built a more modern town in a different location.
In total, about 119 people died from the tragic aftermath of the horrible 1964 earthquake.
When the ground stopped shaking and the tsunamis had stopped coming, 131 people were dead, and the earthquake and its effects had caused around $300 million in damages. The state was a mess and was in complete disarray. Many Alaskans were completely traumatized by this event.
Now they would probably call it post-traumatic stress disorder, but I didn't talk for a long time. So I got, I was scared. I didn't like the aftershocks. I didn't talk. I had, little kids get really clingy or really needy. They need to be by their parents. So the thing that I did is I didn't say anything.
After the news reached the rest of the U.S., America responded and jumped to aid the wounded state. Emergency disaster teams were sent to help the rebuilding effort.
What happened after that was that President Lyndon Johnson essentially said, we're going to do whatever it takes to get Alaska back on its feet again. And so there was a huge amount of money poured in from Washington, D.C., from the federal government to repair everything.
Although Alaska was undoubtedly the area most affected by the earthquake, the destruction was not limited to the state. The earthquake sent out a massive tsunami that spread across the Pacific and destroyed many coastal towns. Crescent City was one of the hardest hit areas. The monster wave flooding the town killed 12 people and caused an estimated $15 million in damage. After March 27th, Alaska would never be the same, but thankfully, the destruction was over.
Before the 1964 Alaska earthquake, America didn't realize the potential dangers of earthquakes and all the troubles they entailed. After the 1964 earthquake, however, earthquake safety became a priority. In Alaska, stricter building codes were enforced to assist buildings with withstanding future earthquakes. The 1964 earthquake also led to many advancements in seismology. Michael West, an Alaska seismologist, stated, "The 1964 earthquake was a watershed moment in earth science. The earthquake helped prove the idea of plate tectonics." The man who proved this theory was George Plafker, a United States geologist. Plafker and his team painstakingly studied the Earth until they came up with a groundbreaking conclusion. He discovered that it was caused by the giant fault that lies underneath all of the southern Alaska margin, stated geologist Peter Hausler. Now, plate tectonics is crucial to understanding geology. With the information that Plafker and the other scientists obtained from the earthquake, engineers were able to create safer conditions for citizens in the event of an earthquake. And because of these new safety conditions, many lives were saved when another earthquake hit Alaska nearly 55 years later. At 8:29 a.m. on November 30th, 2018, a 7.0 earthquake shook Eagle River and Anchorage. Despite the earthquake's size and location, there were no casualties and there was minimal damage to metropolitan areas.
Although this disaster was arguably the most tragic event in Alaskan history, the 1964 Alaska earthquake was a very important event that completely changed scientists' understanding of earthquakes and ultimately made Alaska a safer place for generations to come.